It's Newsday Tuesday with Richie and John. Class is in session. Keep your headphones on. Richie and John. It's Newsday Tuesday, your weekly news blast. We dive into the stories impacting LGBTQ with voices that inspire and bring the truth to you. No suffering fools or the powers that fuck up our lives. Fighting Trumpism and fascists, with truth spewing the White House lies. It's Newsday Tuesday.
From coast to coast across North America, the Mutual Broadcasting System proudly presents Richie and John, the LGBTQ+ podcast. For those who are proud to suffer from the fictional Trump derangement syndrome, this was just what you've been waiting for. Welcome to this week's Newsday Tuesday episode. Now, here are your hosts, Richie Roy and John McMullen.
Welcome to another episode of Richie and John. It is Newsday Tuesday, when we are bringing you all the news that is fit to print, I guess audibly print, on our podcast. And I'm here, of course, with our wonderful co-host, John McMullen. And if you are watching us on YouTube, you're seeing us smiling, but it brings to mind the song Tears of a Clown, because it has been quite a few days, and we have a lot to talk about. But John, I hear that you have been all shook up, to use another musical reference.
Yeah, it got to be a little bit shaky around here yesterday around midday here in the Coachella Valley and all the way down to San Diego, because about halfway between Palm Springs and San Diego, we had an earthquake that was somewhere between 5 and 6. And, you know, when they get up that far in magnitude, you're going to feel it. Like if you look at the U.S. Geological Services or Survey's map of earthquakes, you'll see activity here in Southern California every single day, and lots of it. Most of it we don't feel, but when it gets up into the 4, 5, 6 range, we don't just feel it. We're like, shit, it's time to duck and cover. So that's basically what happened. And it was shaky for probably about 45 seconds, which is kind of a long one.
So that is a long one. I mean, I will say that in 6 months, there probably won't be a USGS website. So don't worry, there won't be any more earthquakes, because they won't be registered. If the earthquakes and no one's there to document it, does it even quake?
Well, similarly, if you're basically going to wipe out the National Weather Service and NOAA, we're not going to have to worry anymore about global climate change and temperatures rising either. So
or hurricanes.
Yeah, or hurricanes, right? Exactly.
No need to care about that.
Yeah,
right.
and least of all, if you live in the middle of America, you don't even have to ever worry about another tornado. And those are the ones that really scare me.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. No, thank you on that.
I lived through one of those in Illinois, and no, thank you.
No. Yeah. So, all jesting aside, it has been kind of a crazy week. We've seen a lot of sort of really shocking moves towards authoritarianism. And our first story really kind of is a lens on that. And it speaks to our community, but then, there is a much larger discussion. So, in a harrowing case, Andrea Hernandez, a Venezuelan makeup artist who was seeking asylum legally in the United States, was deported to a El Salvadoran prison following a flawed investigation led by former police sergeant Charles Cross Jr. Cross, whose past has been marred by credibility issues, identified Hernandez as a gang member, which resulted in his deportation despite no substantiated connections to any criminal group. Cross, who now works for Core Civic, unsurprisingly, a for-profit company managing ICE detention centers, claimed that Hernandez's tattoos were gang-related. However, sources indicate that the tattoos reflected cultural heritage, not gang affiliation. Hernandez was deported to a supermax prison infamous for torture and deplorable conditions, based on information from intelligence reports. Hernandez's legal counsel, Lindsay
Kozlowski, I think it is,
criticized the deportation process, emphasizing the lack of due process and the reliance on disputed intelligence and private contractors in critical decision making. There have been videos that have sort of surfaced that seem to depict Mr. Hernandez being abused and physically assaulted in this Salvadorian supermax prison. And this is just one of many folks who, first of all, the idea that we are contracting, that our federal government is contracting with a dictator in Latin America to basically contract to render people into a supermax prison that is known to be basically inhumane, dangerous, and it turns out maybe also a permanent place to go, even if you are innocent. Because what we've seen this week is that this government is not willing to return Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a migrant from Maryland who is wrongfully deported, not willing to get them back, this person back. The U.S. government acknowledged in court filings that this was a mistake and then said, well, sorry, too bad. We can't do anything about it now. It went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court sort of split the baby a little and said, well, really, you guys should try to get this guy back, sent it back to the lower court, where the government basically said, yeah, we're not going to. We have no interest in that. And then just today, the head of El Salvador, President Nayib Bukele, was in the Oval Office with our current president. And they were just kind of joking about how neither of them have any power to get this innocent person back to the U.S.
You know
and
what
they
I
don't have any plans to.
Bullshit. And as far as I'm concerned, the fact that Trump is responsible for this, that in and of itself is another form of him committing treason against the people of the United States. I am sick of this crap. It is time for somebody to arrest him and to send him to an El Salvador prison. This is unconscionable. Why this can be happening to us because they don't like gay, lesbian, bi, trans people. What happens when they start arranging to make mistakes with one of us? And they send us off, and it's out of their hands to be able to get custody back. Right. Or somebody is tortured to death.
And this is exactly in a sort of hot mic moment before the news conference. The current president was joking with the president of El Salvador that, quote, homegrowns are next. You need to make 5 more facilities because there's not enough room. What does homegrowns mean? American citizens is what that means.
Yeah.
And
people who didn't vote for him.
Right. It's honestly, there have been so many moves that this administration has made in a very short time that have been grotesque.
It's time for the CIA to do their fucking job and to take him out. They have one responsibility left on their shoulders with him, and that is to get rid of him.
I just don't understand why at some point I'm at a loss for words because obviously the Republican Party is so afraid of this person and is so actually maybe just wants an authoritarian regime in the United States. Maybe that's what they actually want. But the Democratic response to this stuff has been too weak also by half because, to me, the idea that someone who is innocent and is rotting in a supermax prison in El Salvador, and the government is ignoring the Supreme Court's order, a unanimous decision, by the way. They threw it to the lower court to effectuate it, but basically saying, get this guy back. And they're saying, we don't fucking care. And no one is really, no one is really seeming to be that up in arms about basic miscarriage of justice and sort of talk about a canary in the coal mine.
We had basically what was, I guess, trying to masquerade as a big music festival event here in the Coachella Valley this past weekend when 100,000 people were together with one of our favorites, Bernie Sanders, who was reminding them that it is time to hold these people accountable. And I'm glad that Bernie was out here talking with a lot of young people. You know, granted, I don't think that there were a lot of Trump supporters there, but you've got to keep the rallying cry going.
You do. And it really has to come. It's going to have to come from a lot of different places. Seeing the absolutely vertiginous flip-flopping and spinning around of the tariffs suggests to me that there are some folks that have gotten into this president's ears about how stupid all these plans are, because he keeps exempting more and more things from his dumb plan, because none of it makes sense and none of it is smart or good or something any economist would ever say to do.
You know what I'd be fine with him throwing like a 500% tariff on? Any of that cheap China crap that has his name attached to it.
Right. But you know, in terms of holding this administration accountable, you know, one thing I did see today being Monday, that I'm happy to finally see is Harvard struck back at the administration's moves to sort of do what they did with Colombia and to say, you know, because the federal government was basically threatening to, you know, withhold federal funding, grants, and sort of do an audit and all this stuff, unless Harvard agreed to basically give them carte blanche to change their academic plans, you know, look into their faculty, sort of just go wild and just run Harvard. Thankfully, and I'm glad, Harvard said, fuck you today. And so we will not do that. We are not letting you dictate what happens in our halls. Academic freedom is academic freedom. The First Amendment still exists. And we are not going to comply with all of your dictates. After they initially were kind of a little bit receptive. But as happens with bullies, you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And that's exactly what happened. And, you know, they finally saw the light, and instead of just rolling over, stood up. And we'll see what happens. It probably won't be pretty, but I'm glad that it's happening. And, you know, if there's one institution that has the pockets to weather this kind of storm, it's probably Harvard. You know, again, I'm glad to see that there's starting to be resistance at sort of more of the corporate institutional levels, because it's going to take everyone saying don't like where this is going.
Yeah. Same thing with law firms.
That has been an absolute travesty as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And, you know, as someone who worked at a large law firm for a number of years, these are huge companies, extremely, extremely well capitalized companies, full of
and
very,
judges
very
have
smart.
not seemed very amenable to the administration pulling this shit with their colleagues in the legal profession.
Right. But the thing is, these companies are showing themselves to be, you know, and we saw early little bits and pieces of this, and we've talked about on the show, companies like Booz Allen Hamilton, you know, within 2 seconds of the new administration getting in there, pulling from World Pride, because they know where their bread is buttered. And these firms know that if they don't play ball, they will be put on a blacklist. They won't, and their clients will run away from them. So, and they're not brave. It turned out they're some of them are responding to actual executive orders. Others are in an anticipatory way, pathetically groveling before this administration and asking, what can we do to make sure that we're not in the crosshairs? It's pathetic.
Well, let's turn our attention to something that affects a lot of people also in our community in as far as those people who are impacted by being low income, and also people who are in their senior years. In a significant policy shift, newly confirmed CMS administrator, CMS in this case being the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, their administrator, Mehmet Oz, you know him as Doc, has instructed state medical officials to cease providing coverage for gender-affirming care to transgender youth. This directive impacts many low-income families dependent on Medicaid, a federal and state program that covers 40% of U.S. minors. Released in an open letter, CMS emphasizes, quote, an underdeveloped body of evidence, end quote, for gender-affirming interventions, citing concerns about sterilization risks. Despite broad medical consensus supporting gender-affirming treatments as effective, the letter references the contested UK CAS review, as we've talked about before, as a basis for its stance. Oz confirmed earlier this month that Oz, who was confirmed earlier this month, has faced scrutiny for his shifting views, particularly concerning trans rights and reproductive policies. On inauguration, the president, Mr. Trump, endorsed an executive order targeting gender-affirming care for minors, directing HHS to eliminate perceived mutilation procedures. Critics like former HHS official Adrian Shanker argue that this move misuses regulations, potentially reducing care access, an action primarily affecting vulnerable trans youth from low-income backgrounds. Observers worry that this letter, though, is not legally binding and may lead states to further restrict medical.
So, this story, again, let's start at the very top. Dr. Mehmet Oz, such a credible doctor to be running Medicaid and Medicare, shilling for whatever cranberry supplements on television, not fit for the job, as is all of the folks who this president picks to run anything, not fit for the job, only willing to be loyal and to carry the water of the stupidest policy choices.
We should call him the Wizard of Idiocy.
Yeah. The wizard, there's so many things we could call this particular person, but Mehmet Oz is clearly just, running with this administration's, again, sort of unique animus towards trans folks, citing the CAS review, again, which is not a U.S. thing. That's from the UK. It's also been broadly discredited, talking just vaguely about, quote, fears of sterilization, again, like unfounded. It's not science, it's pure policy and pure ideology. And again, this is the same party that for years has beat the drum about states' rights. And now, when they're in power, they are directing states to do things or to not do things. So they love states' rights, except when the states want to do something that they don't like, in which case, fuck the states, and they're directing them to do otherwise.
Yeah, I also get concerned when I see officials starting to throw terminology like mutilation around as though this were like the same as, female genital mutilation or something that happens in other countries where they're simply getting their organs cut off.
Well, and this goes back to, like, again, fundamental kind of fever dream when it comes to gender affirming care for trans youth. Because, there have been congressional hearings, no one is talking about bottom surgery for trans youth. This is about gender affirming care, largely involving things like puberty block or other types of interventions that are, again, proven to be widely successful, and again, stepping back further, that parents and their children would like to get.
And tell me this, Richie, didn't Dr. Oz have a reputation of being affirming or supportive towards transgender people?
I don't know. Is that true?
I think that he used to make supportive statements to trans individuals, and it would seem to me that he's just playing this card now to be a part of this crazy administration. Yeah,
that wouldn't surprise me. It's also just that he's someone who, and I'm trying to remember now where I read it, that I believe there was an article many years ago. Yes. It was an article in the New Yorker, actually in 2013, about Dr. Mehmet Oz. And it goes into kind of how people can kind of fall down a rabbit hole, because he had been, in many ways, for many years, I mean, in some capacities, he was a very well-respected, like, physician, at Columbia. I believe he was at Columbia. He was a cardiologist. And over time, just slowly became less and less a doctor and more a charlatan, a TV personality, and just and going from hard science and, again, sort of respected cardiology practice to shilling for all kinds of supplements and crazy things. And when you see someone who's shilling things, that is someone who Trump likes, because that's what Trump loves. I mean, Trump loves a charlatan and a shill. Yeah. And that's what he found in Mehmet Oz.
I live in California. I'm thinking maybe it's time to start a petition to move some sort of piece of legislation through in our state, since she resides here now. But I think it's time that we stop Oprah Winfrey from being able to unleash any more of these nut jobs on us, because she's also responsible for unleashing not only Dr. Oz, Phil, but also Dr. Phil.
Absolutely. And talk about someone who has probably set back the mental health of tens of thousands of Americans through his bullshit. Yeah, seriously. Yeah, no, that is a great point. But, Mehmet Oz is someone who is sort of a new player in terms of just being a shithead. But we have another story of someone who has been a shithead for a long time. So Texas's Attorney General and America's favorite melted candle of a human, Ken Paxton, who is known for his staunch anti-LGBTQ positions, has announced his candidacy for the U.S. Senate. Running against incumbent John Cornyn in 2026, Paxton positions himself as a fervent supporter of the current president's agenda. In a social media post, he attacks Cornyn as a, quote, rhino, and pledges to dismantle the D.C. establishment. Cornyn, a longtime senator with a conservative record himself, retorts by branding Paxton a, quote, con man and a, quote, fraud, highlighting past controversies, of which there are many. Paxton's campaign announcement featured on Laura Ingram's Fox News show, urging voters to replace Cornyn after decades in Congress. Cornyn foresees costly legal battles ahead, referencing Paxton's impeachment and fraud investigations. Both candidates, nonetheless, share anti-LGBTQ histories, advocating policies against marriage equality, gender rights, and more. Paxton trades on his perceived alignment with Trump's ideals and critiques of LGBTQ rights as campaign cornerstones, drawing attention to his past legal and ethical issues. Paxton we've talked about him before. He is, if you might recall, the truly vile individual who has used the powers of the Attorney General's office to subpoena medical records of families in Texas who have sought telemedicine care from other states for gender-affirming care.
His own legislature, which is under GOP control, tried to get rid of him, in the last couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, he's completely vile and is in that way a perfect MAGA Trumper, because I mean, if you just if you haven't before, just Google Ken Paxton and just click on the images tab, and he looks exactly like what you would imagine. And when I called him America's favorite melted candle, it's because he looks like a goddamn melted candle of a human. He is hideous inside and out and has reviled our community forever. And, again, like, this is like opposite Sophie's Choice, like John Cornyn versus fucking Ken Paxton. That state.
You know who I wish would run for senator down there, just because I think he could win because of his name value and his tie to things that he's tied to, but would completely turn things upside down. But he's too smart to run for U.S. Senate, and that is Mark Cuban. I'd like to see Mark Cuban run for that, because he's a smart business guy. He's got the money to do it, but I don't think because he is smart, he'll never do it.
Yeah. No, I mean, he has a lot of, it's kind of one of those things where do you have more power, as one senator or like kind of just a commentator who can kind of like be on Twitter all the time?
Right.
I mean, because he's very pithy. He's very pithy, and he's actually like a very compelling figure in a lot of ways.
Well, maybe what he should do is actually run for governor of the state, and then it would be just like in Illinois, where you've got a real fun and straightforward thinking billionaire running the state. And because I love the way that Pritzker would really try and get under Trump's skin by saying, yeah, I'm a real billionaire. You're full of it. And by the way, I happen to support these progressive values.
Yeah, I mean, but what you just said kind of made me think about something that I hadn't thought about before in exactly that particular way, though, is that really what we're seeing with this administration, with all of this, is really the chickens coming home to roost from decades of a conservative Supreme Court eviscerating campaign finance reform. Because what we're seeing and Citizens United, because we know when we're saying, oh, let's get a good billionaire in there, it's because now, unless you've got billionaires.
Well, I hate billionaires. But there are degrees of billionaires. There's very few good ones, but at least there are a few good ones.
Right. No, but what I'm saying is that, but it's showing that at this point, because of campaign finance reform basically being eviscerated by the Supreme Court, that politics are bought and sold at such a high level that unless you have infinite individual resources as a progressive, you are fighting with two arms tied behind your back, because it's about dark money and PACs, and who likes to fund those? Shady, crazy people like the Mercers or Musk or the Kochs or you name it. So anyway, we could, I feel like, Newsday Tuesday could, I think, bleed into like, Weepy Wednesday at this point. We could just keep going, but we will try to keep things tight, but we do have a story that is someone holding folks accountable, and I'm glad that they are doing it. So Joe Ellis, a transgender helicopter pilot, has filed a lawsuit against Matthew Wallace, a right-wing influencer, for falsely accusing her of causing a fatal collision in Washington, D.C. that claimed 67 lives. I don't know if you guys remember this. This was shortly after the new administration came into office. The misinformation initially spread on social media led to transphobic hate and threats against Ellis, making her fear for her and her family's safety. Ellis's lawsuit, filed in a Colorado federal court and supported by the Equality Legal Action Fund, claims that Wallace crafted a, quote, destructive narrative for his 2 million followers. Although Wallace later attempted corrections, Ellis argues his actions instigated a harmful campaign. Despite receiving an Air Medal for her military service, Ellis was wrongfully identified as one of the pilots involved. Seeking to donate any damages to victims' families, Ellis states, quote, free speech has consequences, emphasizing accountability for those spreading falsehoods and inciting harm.
Yeah. I remember right after that incident happened over the Potomac that they were actively trying to push that this was some transgender person who had been responsible for this collision with this military helicopter and the American Airlines jet. And I just knew then, this is just another one of those, red flag moments, and that this is going to turn out to be bullshit and somebody's life is going to be destroyed in the process. And sure enough, threats, came tumbling in. And I'm glad that this veteran is fighting back and that they're going to probably have a very good chance at succeeding with this litigation. And my hope is, I think it's very nice of her to say that, she would like to give the proceeds of this, if they are successful in court, that she'd like to give the proceeds to the families of those 60 some odd people who unfortunately died in that incident. But she's got to take care of herself and her own family. And, in this country anymore, we shouldn't have to worry about people being crazy like that. But if you look at what happened earlier this week as well, when the Democratic governor of the state of Pennsylvania's house was set on fire, because he was Jewish, we're still back in the 1800s in terms of our behavior as a society. And it's really disgusting. It's just totally disgusting. And her first responsibility, I think, is to herself and her family. It's great if she can help others, but this is just, it's beyond the pale that this kind of crap is going on. And I hope that she's very successful in doing this. I have a problem with calling Mr. Wallace a influencer, because here's the deal. I had to go look him up and see who and what he does. I'd never heard of him before. And as far as it's like all my friends on various social media platforms that call themselves influencers, that I'm like, yeah, you're my friend and you do some fun stuff, but come on, influencer, somebody if you've got millions of people following you, you're an influencer. Anymore, you have less than 1 million people following you, you're a whore on the internet. So just chill out. These people have very high opinions of themselves, and I wouldn't give him the time of day. Unfortunately, people who did give him the time of day gave her, referring to Joe Ellis, a hard time every day.
Well, that's the problem, is that there are these troll armies. This guy, again, who knows who he is, who cares, but he has enough rabid followers who will harass someone like this. And, this story reminds me of the fact that, of course, they would blame a trans woman, and then, we will say sorry later, we will retract later. They always bury that. So they will do the initial sort of splashy thing, make an assertion, get people riled up, and then quietly later, if at all, retract it, or, at least kind of nuance it or whatever. But the damage is done. But at the end of the day, it really shows exactly where their heads are at, because I saw a post, this is maybe a month ago, from some right-wing, idiot, influencer, who, it was a picture that she had taken, getting on an airplane, and the cockpit door was open, and there was a picture of the pilot who, from the picture from behind, was black. And her post was, "If I don't make it, you know why, blame D." Just the existence of a black pilot in the cockpit is, to many folks on the MAGA side, evidence of DEI, that person is not entitled to be in that cockpit, because they think the only people who should be in a cockpit are cis, white, straight men. No women, no trans folks, no black people, no people of color. They shouldn't be in there. It should be, a straight white guy.
Where do you think most of our airline pilots come from? Where do you think that they've been before they went to a commercial airline?
A lot of them in the past have been from the military.
Right. And tell me, I think, by a large measure, there are an awful lot of African Americans who go into the military because they're deprived of having great opportunities to, learn and to grow in a profession if they aren't in the military. So they've served your country, they serve it well, they go on and they have opportunity working for a commercial airline. Why wouldn't there be an African American in the pilot seat or the co-pilot seat? To me, it completely makes sense, considering how many people of color are in the United States military.
But you have to go back to where their heads are at. Because if you look at recent stories...
Their heads are clearly implanted in their hindquarters.
Right. But if you look at recent stories in terms of armed forces recruiting, that Pete Hegseth's armed forces, they are pulling back from recruiting in communities of color. They are changing their television advertisement, their web advertisement, to not show people of color. Because as far as they're concerned, And they're not showing women. We've seen everything from taking the pictures of the, Enola Gay off of the website because it had the word gay in it, to deleting references to the Tuskegee airmen, and even deleting a reference to B. Arthur being in the Marines. They don't, this administration and the folks who believe in what they do don't think that women or people of color should be in the armed forces either.
So much for the most successful marketing campaign to get people to join the military in history. So much for be all that you can be.
Well, and the thing is, why would you at this point? Yeah. Whether you are a woman, a person of color, gay, or otherwise, why would you want to be in this military when you see what they're doing to the veterans? It's outrageous. But anyway, I mean,
I want to get some reaction from our audience. So let me pose this to you, and you can definitely drop us a line with your thoughts on this for a future broadcast. But how should victims of false accusations balance protecting their privacy with addressing public misinformation? What's your thought on that? Drop us a line, info@richieandjohn.com. That's AND, not the ampersand. It won't get to us if you put an ampersand in it. Yeah, info@richieandjohn.com if you'd like to respond to that. You can also use our voice line and call in if you'd like and give us your feedback as well. And that number, of course, is 878-768-8825, and that's also on the website at richieandjohn.com. Richie, the Trump administration decides to ignore journalists who include pronouns in their email signatures, accusing them of ignoring biological reality. White House Press Secretary Caroline the Cunt Leavitt tells the New York Times that such reporters cannot be trusted to write an honest story because they have pronouns that they put in their email.
Okay.
Who knew?
I know that we're going to continue with the story, but I want to stop there for just a second because first of all, you know that I don't love using certain words, but the word you use to describe Caroline Leavitt, I'm like, yeah, you're kind of right about that.
Yeah, I know. It's really become as commonly used, I think, in the American lexicon frequently now as it does get used a lot in our neighbors across the pond in England like to use it because it really truly is descriptive of some of these people who have just absolutely lost their minds.
Well, and the thing about her is that there's so much galling about her. I mean, first of all, she's very young, and she's just clearly is just this kind of glossy-eyed ideologue. And the idea that she would argue that those reporters cannot be trusted to write an honest story. She has not uttered a single honest word since she has taken that podium. I mean, she is Orwellian to the utmost degree. She will say any absolute craven, crass lie that the administration wants to peddle with no compunction at all.
I was wondering how he was going to outdo himself in this administration after having a little wimp like Sean, what's his name, and the one he started with. Right. And then, of course, horrific woman who is now the governor of the state of Arkansas.
Huckabee Sanders?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but this one, I mean, I've seen a lot of
the cake.
I've seen a lot of memes that are actually pretty right on, which they put her face on the garb of that famous North Korean news anchor, the one who is very dramatic in all of her, sort of full-throated expressions of how wonderful the glorious leader is. And
is that a real person? I was thinking that was some sort of an AI creation.
The North Korea one?
The Korean.
No, she's real. She is real. Look at YouTube. She is real, and that meme is accurate because the things that come out of this Caroline Leavitt's mouth, it's just she will say any kind of bullshit lie, and she'll call the sky purple. And if a reporter, comes back at her about that, we'll just double down. It is wild. But anyway, yeah. I didn't mean to interrupt you. So
that's all right. Katie Miller, anyway, from the Department of Government Efficiency, them, DOGE, They're the good guys. She is reinforcing this stance, stating that reporters using pronouns neglect scientific facts. Since January, the administration ordered the removal of gender-related pronouns from the email signatures across the government employees, and some journalists and allies use pronouns for accurate, respectful communication and to support transgender and non-binary individuals. Critics argue that this policy prioritizes ideology over information accuracy, as seen when Matt Berg tested it by adding pronouns to his signature. While the Associated Press challenged media bans successfully, the administration's stance indicates a focus on controlling press interaction and journalistic norms. Big surprise there.
Right. I mean, like, what do they want? What do they want the email signature to say? Like Richie Roy, Mutual Broadcasting System, 7 inches cut. Like, what do they want? Like, come on. That's stupid.
Well, you know, they had to have something to pick on with the media this time because fake news is just such a tired phrase. They had to come up with a new drum to bang, I think.
Well, and, you know, to go and in terms of this media thing, several recent developments. I mean, this pronoun thing, they have been kind of being stupid about for a while. But, you know, we saw recently, you know, with the Associated Press, they did not cave on the initial gambit of trying to control facts and reality with the Gulf of America. The AP said, fuck that. It's actually the Gulf of Mexico and always has been. And they got barred from the White House press corps. They won a lawsuit on that. And nonetheless, today in that Oval Office appearance with the president of El Salvador, they barred the AP anyway. Yeah. So they do not care. I mean, they very much obviously do not care about a free press. And so, yeah, they'll take anything they can get, a pronoun in an email signature, you know, whatever it takes. And you know, even again, things like the current president on Truth Social or Truth Media or whatever the fuck it's called was threatening to, I think, 60 Minutes. Is that NBC or CBS? That's CBS. CBS threatening, basically sicking the FCC on them, saying that they are unfair to the administration and that the FCC should pull their licenses.
Well, they can ask the FCC to do that all they want, and CBS does own stations in a handful of markets, but the network itself is not governed by the Federal Communications Commission. It's a network. It's not a licensed entity. Anybody can run a network.
Right. But just to show the kind of the thug tactics.
Yeah, of course. None of this stuff surprises me at all. You know, what I'd like to hear from our listeners and viewers is, you know, how important is it for journalists to maintain independence from government imposed norms on communication? You've been living in a free country. Can you even imagine what it would be like to only be fed state-run media like they are in Russia? I mean, you know, Vladimir Putin, he's got this all figured out. And I'm sure that Trump wants to be able to do exactly the same thing as his boss.
And you know, if you can't do it through a dictate, an edict, you can do it through other means. You can do it through harassment and through financial ruin. And so and we're seeing them do this in a lot of different ways, which is there are things that they aren't allowed to do, whether it's the First Amendment or Congress's, you know, purse power. But if they just break an agency, in theory, that agency still exists. They didn't close it because Congress is required to close it. But if you break it to the point that it's useless, it's the same basic thing. And again, if the First Amendment theoretically exists, but you can cow NBC and CBS into paying millions of dollars into your coffers and pulling their punches and defunding, you know, NPR and PBS, you know, in essence, you're accomplishing the same thing as if there weren't a First Amendment.
You know, there's another thing that happened in terms of all the Doge cutback stuff and all that really actually surprised me because it is part of the United States of America's propaganda. and that is the Voice of America, which they have closed. And I was just reading in one of the broadcast industry trade magazines, they put out a daily bulletin, and I was just reading a story yesterday morning about how this has become a real concern because there are people who have benefited in the way that we would want them to benefit in places like Iran from having access to the information that was being sent via Voice of America. And I'm surprised that Trump wouldn't want that kind of propaganda getting to points all around the world, unless, of course, he's taking his orders once again from Vladimir Putin.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't.
Other than that.
It doesn't make sense. And early on, there was, I remember there was that kind of talk, which is about whether it's the Department of Education or about Voice of America, the kind of, cooler heads said they're probably not going to follow through on their plans, on their sort of promises to get rid of these, because why would you get rid of something that gives you a lot of power? The VOA is a voice, literally, like you said, a broadcast voice that is global in reach. The DOE you can use to influence policies and things, but they seem to not care. I mean, they're going to dismantle the DOE. They're dismantling the VOA. Like, it doesn't make sense. And people, again, I always and this goes back to Trump 1.0. People were always saying that they're playing 6-dimensional chess.
By the way, we have another freedom of speech related story tonight, and it comes from our favorite Sunshine State.
Yes, our favorite state. Yes, that wonderful state where Ron DeSantis wears his little white boots and just sort of fucks with everyone for no reason. So in Florida, a cherished teacher, Melissa Calhoun, has been dismissed for adhering to a student's preferred name, a step she took without parental consent, as required by a controversial state policy. After 11 years in Brevard County schools, Calhoun became the first apparent victim of this 2023 rule introduced by DeSantis. It mandates parental consent for using names other than legal ones, which I can just say, my legal name is not Richie. It's my preferred name, and it's the name that I was called in school. I guess my teachers would have been fired for calling me Richie because that's not the name that's on my birth certificate, but whatever.
Is it Dick? Or that's just something you like?
Yeah, exactly. But despite her dismissal from Satellite High School, community support has swelled for Melissa Calhoun. Over 12,000 signatures have filled a petition urging her reinstatement. Advocates like media specialist Christine Staniak argue Calhoun's dedication and respectful approach warrant recognition, not termination. Meanwhile, many believe the case pertains to the student's gender identity, a point of contention amid ongoing debates over anti-trans legislation in Florida. Critics, including GLSEN's Brian Dittmeyer, claim this act highlights regulatory overreach and damages the educational environment by punishing displays of respect and individuality. And yeah, God forbid a teacher care for her students and treat them with dignity. Because why would you do such a thing? I mean, this is kind of the same playbook as they're doing with agencies, right? If you make people at federal agencies so miserable, they'll eventually leave. That's what they're doing with teachers.
Yeah.
Because eventually, if they can just sort of destroy public education, then you could just have vouchers for homeschooling or for, evangelical schools or whatever. It's part of this whole really crazy scheme to just make life miserable for pretty much everyone.
When we change administrations and we get a change in control in Congress again in a couple of years, there's just going to be so much crap that's going to hit the fan so fast that these people, what are they gaining? They're gaining a couple of years, really. That's it. This isn't going to continue forever. they're going to cause this interruption to life as we've known it for a couple of years. And then all of a sudden, we're going to hit the brakes on that crap and we're going to go back to the way things should be and look at this and go, what were we thinking?
That's my hope. That is my hope. I mean, the thing that I think about, though, when I see these, specifically Congress, Republican folks in Congress, whether the Senate or the House, are enabling acts of this administration that hurt their constituents, including farmers and veterans and low-income folks, people who might be Trumpers even. And it suggests to me...
Definitely who are. Because it's the Trumpers, it's those red states that benefit the most from programs like Medicaid and things like that. I mean, there's no doubt to me it's going to take maybe another year for people to really feel the pain of it. But they're going to feel it.
But what it suggests to me, and the thing that I hope is not the case, is that, and with the edict from Mike Johnson to stop having town halls, if they're willing to hurt their own constituents, including those that voted for them, and not have town halls, not be held accountable, have impunity, that it suggests to me that their hope and thought is that there might not be elections to get them out of office in the future. Because if you had an idea that your voters might have an option to get rid of you and you are just fucking them 6 ways to Sunday, that suggests to me that you think that maybe they might not have a choice in the future.
Don't scare me like that. That's not funny.
I can't. I mean, otherwise, how can you explain it? To thumb your nose at your own voters in such a radical way. It's just, to me, it suggests that they think that they will not get primaried, that they will not get voted out of office, and either they think so little of their voters that they just think that they are safe anyway. Maybe because of gerrymandering or because of misinformation, or they think that, there might be in 2 years at the midterms, some reason why they just get to stay in power anyway.
Sure be nice to have a crystal ball right now. Or a time machine. Or a DeLorean.
Yes. Yeah, that would be nice. But, so I think, we've given you a lot to chew on. Unfortunately, we try to usually have some good stories. There were glimmers of hope here, obviously the community rallying for the teacher and the transgender pilot suing. But, it's not the best moment for sure. We will continue to bring you the news that you need to know about our community. It's important to be vigilant and pay attention right now because there's so much going on. I follow a Substack called Zeteo, and it's pretty like rabble-rousy, but it's pretty good. But they have this weekly roundup that they publish on Sunday, which is unfortunate because you're wanting to have brunch, and have an Eggs Benedict and a Bloody Mary, and then you get this email. And it basically is the week in review, and it goes Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It goes through each day and the atrocities that the administration did on that day. And it is a long-ass email. Pay attention. We will be paying attention. We will bring to you what we can about our community and what matters to us. But until Saturday, when we will be with you for Substantial Saturday, we hope you have a good week. We hope that the spring springs for you, unlike here in the Hudson Valley when it was snowing this weekend. But until then, John, hope you have a great week.
You too, and be sure to react to stuff that you hear that drives you nuts or that makes you think and ask questions. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd like to share your thoughts with others at www.richieandjohn.com. You can write to us, info@richieandjohn.com, and you can also call in and share your thoughts, 878-768-8825. So we hope that you'll participate with us and to be with us again on Saturday for Substantial Saturday. Until then, may your shadow fall in pleasant places.
Bye.
With every story told, United in our fight, we lift each other higher. Against the tide of hate, we'll always stand tall. For every person's right, we answer the call. So tune in every week, hear the voices anew. It's the Richie and John podcast here for you. Newsday Tuesday, where the truth won't hide. Together we'll prevail with freedom on our side.